Alright, in today's video we're going to go ahead and build the mating rack system for the 5-inch gear that you've made in a previous video. And with this rack system we're going to go ahead and just copy the tooth geometry and profile from the 5-inch gear and apply it to a piece of material and then array that tooth down the rack. And then we'll bring it into an assembly file and animation so we can make it move. So to do this I'm going to open up a brand new part file and I'm going to make piece of material first that I can then utilize to apply my tooth to. So I'm going to go ahead and just create an object that's going to be 10 inches long. I'm going to come down 0.5, come back 10, and then I'll extrude this the thickness of my gear, which is 0.25. So I'll grab my extrude tool and make this 0.25, and now I have an object. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and grab another sketch, and I'm going to put a sketch on this face of the particular object here because that's how I'm going to utilize my tooth. So I'm going to go back and find my 5-inch tooth or 5-inch pitch gear, and I need to copy the geometry and the tooth profile from that first sketch. So I'll go into sketch 1, hit edit sketch, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this using a Control-C. Finish that sketch. Go into my new part file, and on this new sketch I'm going to do a Control-V. Now what I need to do is similar to being able to create a larger mating gear. I'm going to take this tooth profile and I need to just copy it down onto the surface of what will become my rack. So some things that I'm going to need and keep. I'm going to need to have this tooth, and I'm going to be able to copy that down onto here. I generally don't need this circle anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and eliminate the center circle. What I'll do next is utilize my move tool. So I'm going to highlight the gear, grab my move tool, grab my base point, and the base point that I want to work with is going to be this point of the gear. So this bottom point of the gear, I'm going to go ahead and select that and start moving this gear down to the point on my what will become my rack, and I'll go ahead and apply that. So similarly again, and go ahead and hit done, to what we did when we built a larger tooth or a larger diameter gear utilizing the same tooth, we need to then rotate this tooth up some. So what we'll do is we need to find the angle of rotation. So I'm going to grab my line tool, and I'm going to then from this point on the corner to the other side of my tooth, I'm going to draw a line. And then I'll do it again because I need to find out what is going to be the angle of rotation that I need. So by drawing those two lines, I can gain that angle of rotation right here. And it looks like it's 4.5 degrees. That's pretty easy to remember. So I'm not even going to copy that. But then what I'll do is I'm going to grab my rotate tool, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight that tooth. Find my center point, which is going to be the end of that tooth at that point. And then hit yes. Geometry is being edited. Yep, we're going to go ahead and do that. And now the angle of rotation I'm going to put in here is going to be that 4.5. And then I should be able to hit apply. Whoop. Oh, I think I need to get rid of this angle in order to make this thing move. If you had any problems moving your gear tooth profile to this corner point, you can use your project geometry button to select the geometry on your part that you're moving to, and you shouldn't have any issues then moving to this corner point. After you draw your lines and you go ahead and set up your angle, you can now start selecting the gear tooth profile that you'll use to rotate. So I'm going to grab my rotate tool, and I'm then going to start selecting. I'm going to select this line, and I'll work my way up and around my gear tooth profile like that. I'm not selecting anything else because all of the other lines down here have geometry that could restrict movement. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my center point and locate the center point of my rotation. We get a possible thing, Inventor pops up. Geometry being edited is constrained. Would you like those constraints removed? So I'm going to say sure. So now we can actually move this, and I'm going to go ahead and type in that 4.5 as the angle of rotation for the move. And you can see now that my tooth has positioned itself up onto the rack. So I'll go ahead and hit done. And now I can go ahead and I can start deleting some additional geometry here because there's some things I don't need. I don't need that particular feature. This arc I don't need anymore, so we can get rid of that. As well as this line. That's not necessary either. Now, when I look at this gear tooth, okay, taking a look at my gear profile, when we're looking and working from a round gear, we utilize this line to create the radial point to the center of the gear. What we're going to have to do is we're going to need to adjust that, because on a rack we do not need to have an undercut on our tooth. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and grab my line tool, and I'm going to draw from the bottom of what was little r in the gear tooth profile straight down to my rack. And as I come down, I'm just going to find that point and select it. Then I'm going to then hit escape and delete the existing line that came across. Again, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to find the bottom of that little r and work my way straight down to what would be the rack, and then select that point. I can now delete, again, the other line. This line across the bottom, I'm going to delete at this point, and then I'm going to take and just move my tooth down the rack. So I should be able to go ahead and just highlight the tooth, grab my move tool, and then select the base point. And I can select this point on the tooth profile and move that down to the end of the rack. We do this because if we're going to utilize that old tooth, or the tooth that we've already created, I don't want to have that undercut on that tooth. So I'll go ahead and hit done now. So after you do that and you have your straight line down to the rack, we can go ahead and start the extrusion process. So I'm going to hit finish sketch, and I can go ahead and grab the extrude tool, and I should be able to extrude the top and the bottom. Well, I'm starting to have some confusion here. It's not looking at this extrusion properly. So instead I'm going to then cancel. I'm going to go back into that sketch to see, do I have a closed loop? So I'm going to go into edit sketch, and we'll take a look at that. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and delete the pitch circle. And I'm going to take a look at this and say, well, wait a minute, I don't have a line going across the bottom. So I'll grab my line tool, and then I'm going to select the bottom of the gear profile to the bottom of the gear profile, and now I'll hit finish sketch. Now I should have a closed loop, which now I do. Well, is it going to do it? There it is. Now I have a closed loop, and I can then turn this in the opposite direction to align that on top of the rack, or what will become my rack. So with 0.25 being the thickness of my extrusion, I'll hit OK. And now I can start working with the idea of the array and arraying this gear tooth down the rack. Okay, so to start working on this idea of the array and the pattern for the tooth, what we need to do is we need to go back to that original gear, and we need to know what is the arc length. And what is going to be the arc length from one gear tooth face to an adjacent gear tooth face. So from, say, this point here to this point here. So to do this, again, I'm going to go back to that original sketch. Well, not the original sketch. I'm going to place a new sketch on the gear. Sorry. I'm going to place a new sketch on the gear. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to project the geometry from additional teeth onto this sketch. So I can actually utilize this geometry. So then I'm going to grab my arc tool, and I'll grab that center point arc. So I'm going to go from center point of my gear to from the front face of one gear to the next face gear, and then now I have an arc that I can go ahead and measure. So with this arc set up in place, I can go, now for some reason that arc jumped in length, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that and do it again. You got to be careful about what's happening and what's measuring from where, so we'll do this again, center point arc, and I'm going to grab my line tool, and let's see, we'll go in this direction this time. We'll go from that point across to this point here and select it. All right, and that's right, that's the correct arc length. So with that set up, I can go ahead and grab my dimension tool and select that arc. It highlights. I'm going to select it. I'm going to pull up. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to come down and I'm going to look at the dimension type. As I slide over, it gives me radius. I have the option for diameter, but I want the arc length. So when I select it, you can then see the extension lines coming up off that arc length, and then the actual dimension running between it. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that dimension, and that dimension is 0.785. And I'm going to double click, and it doesn't give me any additional information there or additional decimal places. So 0.785 is the number. And now we can go back to my rack, and well, that's the wrong one. There we are, part 12. And now we can start setting up the array. Okay, now that we know the information for the arc length, that's going to be the linear measurement that we utilize to set up this pattern. So I'm going to grab my pattern tool, or my rectangular pattern tool, also known as the array tool, and we can go ahead and I can select this tooth. By selecting that tooth, and we'll see what happens here. I'm not so sure, is that going to give me a full tooth here? I'm not being able to grab that piece down there. Let's see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to grab the direction I want to move in. I want to move in that direction, which is not the direction I want to move it. I want to change that, flip that around, change that direction. And then the distance that I want to put in here was that arc length, because it's going to be from point to point. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 0.785. And I want to say, let's say 10 of these for now. See what we come up with, and then hit OK. And it looks like it's giving me an array. Okay, so the number of teeth I use, 10, can be increased, and my students are telling me it can be 13. So I'm going to go into my rectangular pattern, come down to the Edit Feature button, and instead of using 10, I'm going to come across and make it 13. Whoops. 13. All right, so there we are. We have 13 teeth on this rack. And what you can do is if you wanted to go ahead and center it so that the spacing on one end is the same as the other, you can do that by going back to that first gear and moving that sketch over some. Not a problem. It's easy to do. But right now, let's go ahead and we'll save this part so that we can now take this into an assembly and we can start working with some motion. So I'm going to go ahead from this point to save the part, go into my file, open the new assembly file, so hit New, English, Standard, IAM, hit Create. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to then place the components that I need. The components that I want are going to be the shaft. I'm going to use the gear that I made, and then also I'm going to get the rack that I made here and open them all up. And if I hold down Control and select them, I can bring them all in at the same time instead of having to grab each one at a time there. So we'll go ahead and get this into this assembly, and what we'll probably do is I'm going to end the video and start up a second video on the constraints and setting this up so we get everything lined up.